All right. Hello, everyone. People are trickling in. David, nice of you to show up.
Oh, I got to do my one. I'm not even 1 minute late though.
That's true. Well, I don't know.
It depends on your
seconds.
time zone. We're not.
I was getting scared,
zones.
so I clicked the start webinar button because it was 9 o'clock. So
that's good. I was trying to finish typing out the agenda. So for those who are trickling in, we're doing some new things this time around. If you've done one of these before with us, we're using Zoom Webinar. And what that means is on stage, instead of the wall of people with their video off, you'll just see people that are going to be hosts and panelists. If you are a panelist, and I give you panelist permissions, you don't have to stay on stage the whole time. You're welcome to come and go. I'll change the setting. If your video is off, you'll just be off the screen, but you're also welcome to stay up here. But chat's where the action's going to be, as well as some new features. We have, you can raise your hand, we can poll, and we have Q&A. And the Q&A is going to be really helpful at the end of every section that we have. We will try to have some time for Q&A. As someone is giving a presentation or a demo, or there's a panel, ask some questions and we can refer those questions, come back to in the panel. And we're figuring this out as we go. So a little bit of grace too. So, but I'm excited, and to show you all how excited I am, I wanted to start with a poll to find out how excited everybody else is. And let's see if this works. All right, everyone. How excited are you right now?
Well, I think it's all just dashes. I don't understand the scaling system.
They're all emojis. My poll doesn't do emojis.
They're definitely not all emojis.
No.
Oh.
I'm 2 dashes. I'm 2 dash excited. Personally.
All right.
I can't even select anything.
No, neither can I.
App.
Oh, the host and the panelists can't vote?
Vote.
That's BS.
That actually is amazing. I am really excited. I'm really stoked. There's a lot. The only disappointing thing about this meetup is I can't get all of my favorite people to present at one time because I only have 90 minutes. But we have a lot of people and a lot of great presentations and a lot of projects to show. And we're going to talk about a lot of new things that are in Redwood. So very exciting. Another feature that we have that I want to see if it works. Oh, there it is, the raise hand. Oh, there's Danny. Danny's going to be a thing. So I think if you raise your hand, you bump to the top of the list. Would someone try that right now? This is going to be important later on. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, look at that. And it does make a list. Okay, good. See, we may or may not have a little bit of a game show variety coming up later on. So very good. All right, I think that's all the new features. Does anyone have any questions? So again, there are a few of you that are not panelists yet. I'm going to give you panelist permissions. And what that means is that you can flip on to video. Now, you don't have to have your video on the whole time while everyone's talking. You're welcome to be up on stage, but it'll hide you if you're not on video. And if you've never used Zoom before, I don't know how else to help you otherwise, but I hope it's working for folks. So I think that's any other question, anything else anyone thinks I should point out about the format. I'll give a quick heads up on the agenda for today, and then we'll turn things over to Tom for a bit of an introduction. This was all just witty banter, right? This is the prologue to the intro. So the intro will be coming next, but anything else that I've missed? Does anyone else's microphone work?
Mine does.
Tom's does. Tom's sounds.
I'm using my good microphone today. So
you are. You sound good.
Thanks, David.
Yeah. Anyone?
Yeah, I think my
mic works.
Oh yeah, there you all are. All right, this will be good. Okay, so the schedule. Thank you all for the mic test. The agenda for today. There's a few things coming up next. Let me show you that. Well, let me just tell you. I'll throw this in the chat here in a second. But Tom's going to give a bit of an update on the state of the Redwood verse, and we're going to jump right into a panel after that. Did you know you can build a startup with Redwood, or you can build a serious side project with Redwood? Some people are doing that, and we'll do an interview panel with 4 of those individuals. And then Amanda, after that, is going to do a little getting started with Redwood Auth, because you know what? Auth is hard, but it doesn't have to be. Right, Amanda? No, all right, right. Okay. There's more to come after that. I will say that halfway through this, we've got a little fun interactive thing you're going to want to stick around for, because free swag is at stake. It may or may not involve raising your hand. And you'll want to stick around to the end, because we have some great things coming at the end. I'll tell you about our very own Tom Preston Warner is going to be doing a demo, because he's coding again, right? You know what else is hard is GraphQL, Tom, but you know what doesn't have to be hard? GraphQL. So Tom will be doing a demo, and then we have a special little announcement thing for you all at the very end of this. All right, that's all the stuff, so stick around. Tom, I'll hand it over to you, and I will make sure, if you're going to be a panelist for the startup demos and the side project demos, I'm going to make you a panelist right now, so that's coming your way.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming today. It's very nice to have you all here. And we're really excited about the milestone that we've reached in Redwood, which is the Redwood JS 1.0 release candidate. We now have a few of those out, and you can look forward to seeing more of those over time. And so today I wanted to just give a quick intro on where we are, where we're going, timelines, and what is Redwood. You know, when we started, Redwood really was an idea to help people build full stack web applications in a serverless way and be able to deploy on things like Netlify. That's really kind of where the idea came from. But as we started building it, we realized that serverless isn't always the way to go. Depending on what you're doing, traditional architectures might actually be the better choice. And so as Redwood has evolved, it's really come to be able to have a deploy target, a first-class deploy target on both serverless and serverful. Do we say serverful? Traditional, old school, the way we used to do things? Well, either of them is a really great way to deploy Redwood now. And so it's really kind of diverged from that original kernel of an idea to become something much bigger. We've built a community. We have more than 250 contributors to the project, thousands of people that have gone through the tutorial and created projects. We have a handful of startups that we know of that are building with Redwood. Several of them have already taken VC funding. And so we know that Redwood works, and it's now time to get a really solid 1.0 out the door. And so for us, the way that we wanted to decide what that meant, what is a 1.0? Because more than a year ago, I was saying, hey, I think that we'll have a Redwood 1.0 by the end of 2020. Well, it turns out that it's now a year later than that, and we still don't have a 1.0 out the door. And why is that? And I think that's really because we started thinking of Redwood as something that we wanted to be perfect for people to build startups with. And by startup, I mean a real project, a long-term project, something that you could build into a company, something that you could raise money against, something that you would build a large team around. Now, of course, you don't have to build a startup with Redwood, but by making that the bar, by that being the metric, that's what we wanted Redwood to be capable of for a 1.0. And that meant we had to do a bit more work in order to achieve what we thought the bar needed to be. And so that meant integrating things like Storybook and testing and authentication and logging and security by default for your GraphQL endpoints, making the GraphQL really slick, adding things like directives, which I'll show off later for GraphQL. All of these really amazing, useful things that you're going to need if you're going to build something that intends to be or has the ambition to someday be a startup or a very large project. And this is something that none of the other frameworks can offer you in the JavaScript ecosystem or probably anywhere. And so a 1.0 to us meant it needed to do these things. It needed to be stable. And that was going to take some time and experimentation. And that's what we've been up to for the last year. And I think Redwood is much better off for it, albeit a year later to get to the 1.0 or more. But I think everyone benefits that way. But I'm really excited about the 1.0. So what does this really mean for you as a user or as a contributor? It means right now that in the release candidate phase, we're going to be fixing bugs mostly, and we're really going to try not to add new functionality. We will be adding a thing or two that we think are really critical for a 1.0, but really we're not intending to add a lot of new big features. You might see some experimental stuff start going in there, but it's not anything that we're going to expect anyone to use for the 1.0 release. Unfortunately, that means that certain pull requests that are out there that have really amazing functionality that we definitely want to add It's going to be postponed a little bit while we get through the release candidate phase until we can really focus our attention on those things. So if you are one of those contributors with an amazing pull request that you're really stoked to see go in, we love you, we hear you, we just need you to be patient while we get this 1.0 out, because we need to get it out. This is what matters most. We got to get this 1.0 done. I think a lot of people in the ecosystem are waiting for the 1.0 to drop before they want to spend a bunch of time learning it. And so that's what we're doing. So be patient, we'll get there. And then after 1.0 drops, guess what? Innovation time, no holds barred. Things are going to get crazy. We're going to break stuff, and then we'll release a 2.0. And we're really intending to do that probably pretty quickly, because as it turns out, numbers are free and we can increment the major version whenever we want, as long as we make it easy for you to upgrade. And this is why our upgrade notes, our release notes, and things like code mods have been so amazing. If you want to see the most amazing release sequence and help in upgrading your application, and you haven't already been doing that with your Redwood app, go check out some of the release notes. This is like, we're doing this during the 0 dot phase. Like, who does that? Who puts this much care into the upgrade process during the 0 dot phase, right? Pre 1.0. Well, almost nobody, but guess what? We do, because it's good practice for what we know is important for innovating quickly after the 1.0. So that's where we're at. That's why we're excited about Redwood today. And we really want to show you off some of the startups that are being built, some of the projects that are being built with Redwood, some of the things that are coming, and some GraphQL things. And so thank you for being here. And if you're building anything from a side project to a startup, like David said, Redwood is the perfect choice already today, even during the release candidate phase. It's still extremely solid. We're fixing bugs, yes, but they're mostly edge cases. And if you like Redwood, please go star the repo on GitHub. That's going to be really helpful to us just from a community visibility perspective. We really, really like those stars. It makes us feel warm and fuzzy inside and like we want to keep working on the project. So if you want us to keep working on the project, go star the repo. That would be amazing. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, Tom. It's a great time to get started with Redwood, and the release candidate for us is, like Tom said, I just want to reemphasize that it's actually indicating stability and no breaking changes. I feel like I'm answering this question once a day on the forums or in Twitter, that now's a great time to get started with the Redwood project. And we're going to kick off a panel right now, and some of the people there can tell you when they started their first Redwood project intending to go to production. And we've got some single Semver minor digits for projects that started. So let's kick off into the panel next. Amanda, you'll be presenting after this panel, and I think I have you on as a panelist. I haven't seen Peter Pistorius on. Peter's going to join us for this panel. Dom, if you see him in the attendees list on the right side, you can promote someone to a panelist. I'll be looking for him too, but I'll be doing the interview. We'll just try to help me get Peter on board when he shows up, but promote him to panelist. And I'm going to try poll one more time. Ready? See, no, I don't think there's any emojis, but we're going to find out. We found a bug in the system. Okay, so here's my next poll. And there we go. So this is Redwood Experience. This is multiple choice. You have a lot of options here. And I'll just give this one a quick 30 seconds. We really don't know how far people have dipped into the Redwood verse. And for a lot of people that have come to workshops that I've done, they've kind of been watching the project for 6 months or more, and then they kind of chime in. So this helps us check all that apply, just get a feel for who's here today. And it will also inform the kinds of presentations we'll do at our next meetup. Huh? Look at this. We're planning ahead now. More than one release ahead. I mean, we're going big time. All right, I'll give this 10 more seconds, and then I'll do the little Jeopardy thing.
While that's happening, I just wanted to point out, repping the EU flat cap, Redwood flat cap with the gray bottom, not the green ones you guys are wearing.
I am a little jealous of your gray bottom, but I wonder, Danny, if we'll have a way for people to find out how they can get swag Redwood gear today. I wonder, I'm curious about that.
Maybe, yeah. And, this is just early preview. If you're EU, you get this cool gray at the bottom, unlike the unfashionable green that those guys are wearing.
What does green mean? I mean, that's a flat brim. I think it's the flattest of all my brims. So, all right, ending the poll. I'll share some results and let's get things kicked off. Have we seen Peter yet? No, Peter. Dom, help me see if Peter can join, but we'll go ahead and so Danny, Orta, and Zach, welcome. I'll be sharing the screen as each of you do an intro. I'll pull up so you don't have to worry about the screen share. But let's since we're in a Zoom format, I'll let you know who I'm addressing the question to. And so for this first one, let's just go around and please. The first time you're all building something with Redwood, you're building different types of things, serious side project or something that you intend to be a startup or a product that's live now. So please just introduce yourself. Where in the world are you? And tell us what it is you're building with Redwood and kind of the quick pitch, because we're going to go look at that a little bit more. And I'll share my screen as you go. So Zach, why don't you go first and I'll pull up my screen.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Zach Mandro from Palo Alto, California. I am building PullFlow, which is a portmanteau on pull request and workflow. And our goal is to help developers complete code reviews with delightful efficiency. And we do that by combining GitHub and Slack into a unified workflow tool. Just as a quick example, every pull request turns into a thread in Slack and developers can collaborate on the thread or in GitHub, and we synchronize the two so you don't have to worry about which tool you're using.
Cool. And Zach, what stage are you at with this? Like, is this just a website?
Yeah, no,
a good looking website at that?
That's just a template that we use. No, it's we are in beta right now. We're processing about 500-600 pull requests per day, and we hope to launch next year. And I think there was one question about when we started actually using Redwood in March, so pretty early, and we will probably launch around the time Redwood launches.
All right, thank you, Zach. Orta, if you go next, and I'm just going to pull up your Twitter handle, okay?
Sure. Hey everyone, I'm Orta. Most people probably from this community would know me from my work on the TypeScript compiler and documentation. I've been running a very long-term side project that for all of this year that is, I ported over to Redwood about 2-3 months ago, and I've been taking like Redwood very seriously ever since. It is effectively something a bit like Google Docs, but for working on shared puzzle games with people. But it'll take a little bit before I can like show it in any public form, unfortunately.
And you working on Redwood is probably some indicator that you were happy with the TypeScript support in Redwood.
Yeah, it was actually seeing that the sort of TypeScript support in Redwood was getting very solid, which was made me start to look at adopting it. And as someone who works on TypeScript and has made a few little issues and improvements here and there in Redwood, it is genuinely solid, and I've been super happy with it for this entire time. At least I've had to make no core upgrades myself to go and fix things inside Redwood, so it's definitely a good spot if you care about your tooling.
That's great. Thank you, Orta. When you first hopped into, I believe it was Discord, I think we were all like, oh, wait a second, because we've been playing TypeScript catch up for quite a while now. And for us, we thought either we were about to be severely scolded or surprised. So thank you. That means a lot. And Danny, go ahead.
Hey guys, I'm Danny, based in London in the UK. And yeah, I built that little product there, tape.sh, which is a screen recording tool for macOS. Of course, it's built on Redwood. I am also part of the core team at Redwood, and I got introduced to all of these cool people here when I started building tape. Yeah, and I'm just super happy. Orta is happy with TypeScript. I was very scared when I saw his name. I was like, oh no, what's gonna happen? So yeah, pretty pleased. And where are we with tape? So tape is now live. There's a few thousand users that is using the app. We're running it all on serverless and on Vercel. And of course, the unique thing, I guess, about the projects we're demoing here, it's not just a website. There is a native Mac app, as well as a CLI that communicates with the Redwood app through the GraphQL API.
Get me logged in there. Huh? Can see all my
Mm.
tapes. All right. Thank you, gents. So let's go ahead. So did we get Peter on yet? Oh man, he said this morning that internet access in South Africa was not very good today. So we miss Peter Pistorius. Let me introduce Peter for you. I can't at all do it enough justice, but Peter, if anyone got this project off the ground, it was Tom and Peter together. They started, I think, almost 3 years ago. So Peter is the earliest developer working on Redwood, one of the co-creators, and just a great guy. We really like Peter. Peter, unsurprisingly, has been building a startup on with Redwood. It's called Snaplet, and Snaplet is your database lifecycle for development to production. And it's got one of the best mascots ever, but they are a funded startup, and you can take Snaplet for a test drive today. I'll share the screen again as well. And I'll say this for Peter, they're hiring right now. So if you are looking to be a part of an early stage startup, and especially one that's built on Redwood and using a lot of other exciting technologies, Snaplet could be a place that you might want to look into. Peter's based over in Berlin, but they're hiring globally. So that's Snaplet. And Peter, we miss you. We'll definitely get a demo of Snaplet at a future meetup. All right, so Orda and Zach, this next question I had for both of you, let me stop my screen share there. And Danny, let's see, based on time, I've got a question for you, but I know Orda and Zach, you both went through a specific process to evaluate Redwood, to choose before you got into it. And could you just tell us about that? What was that process like for you, and how did you evaluate it? Because there's a lot of options, especially if you want to build with JavaScript. So Zach, could you go ahead?
Sure, yeah. So done a couple of startups and sort of knew what I was looking for. And one of the things in the process was to actually do a real evaluation of different frameworks. The JavaScript landscape changes a lot. So we spent a week on 3 different frameworks, so 4 weeks total before settling on Redwood. And the ones we evaluated were SvelteKit, Blitz, Next.js, and then Redwood. And we did kind of mini prototypes in each of them. And I think that going in, we sort of had our preferences. We wanted to use GraphQL based on our previous startup. We wanted to use TypeScript. It was really important for us. And even Prisma was something that we were looking at seriously. And then React was something that we were questioning whether we wanted to do React or not. So I'd say that all in all the frameworks that I mentioned are all great. But the one thing that really stood out for us with Redwood is that we really like the monorepo and the separation of the two API side and web side, because for us, the web is just another interface and it's not really the most critical interface. So Blitz and some other frameworks like Next.js, they overemphasized on server-side rendering, and that wasn't important for us. What was important for us was to have a strong API. And the other thing we really liked is Redwood's pluggability. We started with one auth system, then moved to another, and then we went to custom. And similarly, we went from Netlify to Vercel to Render. And all of those transitions were super easy because of the pluggability of Redwood. So those were some of the key things that help us choose Redwood over the others.
Thanks, Zach. Yeah, very helpful to hear. And Orda, how about you?
Yeah, a lot of mine actually echoes Zach's really well. I also jumped through a lot of different service hosts for different types of what I wanted for my app. Also ending up at Render. I guess we all just want full servers eventually. What I sort of knew is that I had worked with Rails prior to working on TypeScript and a few other projects, and I knew that there's a lot of value in having a sort of omakase style framework for how you build apps. And if you've never heard that term before, Rails describes its way of saying these are the defaults that we think are the right thing to do. Everything else you can do, but like this alignment and the project along these sets of sort of values really fits with how I want to build my apps. In part because as I'm growing, I want other people to easily be able to get documentation, to be able to learn how these types of apps work without having to go and say, hey, I'm now in an X type of project, but I don't know how testing works generally or how to set up storybooks in a consistent way everywhere. So I try to look for something that fits the scope of, it has an opinion about what it's trying to do, but it's also not trying to force you into a single route. So, I first looked and was like, is this going to tie me to Netlify or something like that? And it didn't. And by looking at like the different ways in which auth providers allow different types of systems and different deployment systems, I felt quite confident in adopting Redwood as a conceptual framework for something that will last me many, many years to work on. And I'm super happy with almost all of the Omikaze available in Redwood. The only thing I've changed so far is Apollo to Relay.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Orta. And again, making those switches has been, I just want to highlight that because it was something we didn't communicate very well, is it's not like you're reworking your entire code base to go from serverless to a traditional persistent server, right? That was probably pretty trivial aside from setting up the hosting, swapping out the auth provider, aside from migrating your users. All these things are things they're pluggable in a general sense. So Danny, a question for you, and I want to switch a little bit, but you've been using Redwood since version 0.6 to build tape. And how's it going so far? Like, what are some highlights where Redwood has worked really well as maybe some challenges? But just give us you're still on Redwood. Tape is got a customer base and growing users. Like, how's it going?
Yeah, and not just growth in terms of customers. There's also Aditya who's helping me build tape as well, right? So it's not just one person startup anymore. You start to have things change when other people are also writing code. Yeah, the challenges right now, not so much, because especially when you deploy to production and you're making changes, you want to know any change you're going to make is going to be solid. So features like scenarios, being able to test things like webhooks, those are the things that made a big difference. And of course, these came after I'd adopted Redwood. So don't think that I was very clever in choosing Redwood because, but I'm glad because what I picked up on was that opinionatedness to make things easier, for you to focus on your product and not focus on all of this cruft that enables you to make your product better. So because everything is standardized, because there's a standard way of writing tests, of having mocks, it makes it easy to keep growing your code base, keep making changes, and keep shipping to production without everything falling over.
And Danny, especially for you, I want to highlight this because it still kind of blows my mind, but you are truly multi-client with a single API. You have an Electron app, you have a CLI, you have a web app, and then you're also using Next.js as a front end for sharing, right? So technically you've got at least 4 clients that you're running off of one API. And there's 10 of you on your team.
No, so I think it's important to choose the right tool for the job, right? And so for recording, obviously it needed to be, at least there needed to be a native element to it. And to do that, you need APIs, right? And Redwood just gives you access to all of your data through the API, through the standard way of doing auth. So it was fairly easy to follow those guides to say, okay, I can see how these APIs requests are made. So you add on the CLI, and then you add on the menu bar app. It was fairly straightforward process once you know how the auth stuff works on Redwood.
Okay, Jens, why? Go ahead.
Yeah, and why Next.js next, along with Redwood? Next.js, because Next.js has some really good server-side rendering capabilities. And I needed this specifically for when tapes are shared, so that you get these OG metadata, OG tags when you paste on Slack, or also to leverage Vercel's caching a little bit better. So it was the path of least resistance to say, let's use Next for what it's really good at, and let's use Redwood for all of the good DX and the things that it's really good at, which is managing the data, speaking to the database, and exposing an API.
All right. Hey, thank you. Okay, I could keep asking questions forever. I'm already 10 minutes over where I wanted to be, which is great because this is all good stuff. Here's my last question, and then Peter, I did intro you in Snaplet. I sung your praises, but you showed up for the most important question, which is, how can we all find out about like when your thing is going to be released? So order for you when you go live, or how could we try out your product today? And probably more importantly, as a community, how could we help you the most? So let me screen share and we'll go around. And Peter, why don't you go first? I'm going to screen share just Snaplet right now, but welcome, by the way. I'm really glad you could join. And how can people try Snaplet today? And what could people do to help Snaplet as a community?
So if you sign up by, hi everyone, Peter here. I had a little bit of internet connection issues, so but I'm here now. So what you can do is go to www.snaplet.dev, create an account, connect it to your production database. If you're willing to do that, I would be honored. Transform your data and restore it on your machine locally, and try to make that part of your development workflow. I'd love to know where it sucks. I think that's really important to me. I'd love to know where you think it could be better in the future. I'm really building this for people like me who want to build products, but want access to production-like data in a safe way. We use Snaplet at Snaplet, which is amazing validation for the product. Yeah, I'd just love you to try it out. If you want to chat to me, come to Discord, create a design partnership with me, and I'll make sure that it works in your organization for your use case.
And Peter, how can we help? I'm clicking this button right here. I already talked about this when you weren't here. I said Snaplet's hiring, and should check it out.
Yeah, and this role is like for a full stack Node.js React engineer. And I think anyone who's contributed to Redwood.js or has contributed to open source has an exposure to the kind of product that I like to build. And you have the skills in order to build something like Snaplet. You're already qualified. So I'd love to speak to anyone that is doing that.
Right. Thank you. And if anyone could, with someone, please post these links in this channel as we go. By the way, we're recording this, and we'll have a forum post afterward with all these links as well, and to the video recording. So thanks, Peter. Glad you're here. Orda, how about you? If we want to find out when you're going live, follow you on Twitter. How can we help?
Yeah, that's basically it. I don't even talk about any of this work publicly yet either. So, like, the only people that really know are core contributors to Redwood, because I keep shipping so much stuff in that direction, and anybody that's read this. So realistically, yeah, you can follow me on Twitter if you care about TypeScript updates. That's generally what I mostly tweet about. But otherwise, yeah, it'll just appear sometime in the middle of next year.
All right. I look forward to a future demo at a meetup. Danny, how about you?
Yeah, so I'm just going to post the links that anyone would be interested in. Yeah, follow on Twitter. Give us a few retweets if you really like the product. There's a free trial if you want to give it a go. And we will be changing some of the pricing models soon. So there's going to be a whole new free tier. And we'll let you know once that's available. And for that information, follow either me or the Tape account on Twitter, or better yet, follow both. And we'll be good to go.
Sounds good. Thanks, Danny. Zach.
Yeah, so our beta is open, and like Peter said, we're early stage and looking for feedback. We designed this to solve our own problem of getting distracted with code reviews. And like I said, a few teams are using it, but it's still pretty early for us. It's open beta. You just have to click on the little get started button and you can start using it. Yeah, we'd love for you to try it. If you are a GitHub user and a Slack user, then we hope this will add value to your workflow. And we want your feedback to improve it and shape the product as we work on it over the next several months to get to a 1.0 release. And to get the latest update, I guess you can remember pull flow, pull request, workflow, pullflow.com, or just look for us in the Redwood community.
Is it Pullflow? I know, well, I'll send some links afterward with everyone's Twitter accounts as well. So thank you, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure to watch you all develop and to get to collaborate with you. So thanks for joining. Amanda, here we go. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being patient. I'm excited. So Amanda and I met, it's one of the highlights of my Twitter experience, because Twitter, but that's where we met, and we invited you in. And since the first time you dropped in on the Redwood community, we've got to be your friend and with you on a journey through a lot of life milestones, career changes, and now you're at Auth0. But I'm just going to hand it off to you as you walk us through getting started with the Redwood project. This is where all Redwood projects start, and how to get started with Auth. Sound good?
Okay, it sounds good. All right, well, hi everyone, it's nice to be here. I'll start by sharing my screen. Hopefully I'm very bad at sharing on Zoom, so give me a minute. All right, so can you see my slideshow?
It looks great.
Yes, no, maybe. Okay, awesome. So hi everyone. Like David said, my name is Amanda. I work at Auth0, and today I'm going to talk to you about Redwood.js and authentication. So what is Redwood.js? Obviously, Tom gave a really great overview, so I'm not going to go too in depth, but I did want to mention my version, which is that Redwood is a magical JavaScript framework that makes building full stack apps effortless for developers of all levels. And what I mean by that is, even if you've never worked with JavaScript before or anything like that, you can get started with Redwood. I think it's perfect for non-technical people as much as it is for technical people. But who am I to say? So about me, I'm a mom to a human and 6 cats. My daughter's actually 15 months old today, which is crazy to think about. I'm a software engineer at Auth0. I'm a former .NET dev turned JavaScript developer, and I'm a Redwood.js fangirl and contributor. And like David mentioned, it's actually because of Redwood that I even became a JavaScript developer at Auth0. So kudos to Redwood for giving me that confidence. Anyway, so let's get to the demo. So I have an app that I've already built that follows the Redwood tutorial up to the authentication step, because the whole point of me doing this is to show you how to do auth. I've also added a non-functional login button that you'll get to see the workflow there. And I've already pre-configured Auth0. I went to their management dashboard, set everything up, and added the config values needed for the app so we can get going a little faster. So let's just see what I've got so far. So switch over to, let me stop sharing real quick, switch my apps here. Let me just share my whole screen so I stop getting confused. Okay, so here we have Visual Studio Code. I've got my Redwood app ready to go. Oh my gosh, all my controls are in the way. Go away. Those Zoom controls are always where you don't need them.
Exactly, when you share screen. Could you boost your font size, the old Command plus?
Good old Command plus. Okay, well, that's plenty. You could go down for me, but
that's great right there if that works for you.
Thank you. Awesome, works for me. So let's see what we've got so far. So I'm just going to run the Redwood dev, which is to start up the server, just so we could see what I have built so far. I have command line aliases. Typically, you would write yarn Redwood dev. I have command line aliases because I like doing things faster. So let's let this kick up. Hopefully Zoom doesn't slow things down too much. And here's our Redwood app. So as you can see, it's not styled or anything, but this is what you get when you start building the app from scratch with the Redwood command. So these posts here came from a very special command that I love more than anything, which is the scaffold command. So to show you real quick how these posts came to be, I didn't build anything on this page. It was just the Redwood scaffold command. It built everything I needed to work with my post data. So you can add post, delete post, all that fun stuff. But naturally, you wouldn't want this accessible to just anybody, right? This is your blog. You don't want just anybody posting to your blog. So let's get this authenticated. So I'll come over here, and I'm very easy to get auth into Redwood. Set up Auth0. And there are a few providers you can use. We're going to go with Auth0 today. It's going to ask us to overwrite our auth.js file, which we'll say yes to. Let's let it do its thing.
I always want the like transition music when it's running the install scripts. This is also where I mentioned that
This is
auth
where
is supposed to
Zoom-
be really hard, right? So
Not.
no, okay.
Okay, so we're done. So now if we come back over, well, that's just because it reloaded. We don't have permission now. And if we go back to our homepage, we don't have permission. So that's a problem because naturally this is a blog. We want people to be able to read our blog. So how do we address that? So Tom had already mentioned a little before about directives. So I'll go over that real quick just so we can get our blog working as we would want it to. And I'll show why that happened automatically. So I don't know if we explicitly said this, but by default, Redwood.js provides auth on all of your endpoints through these directives. And I know Tom's going to go more into depth later when he talks about GraphQL. So all we need to do to get our post to reload is to change this require auth to skip auth. So I'll do that to both of these for now. Save it. And then if we come back and refresh, there our posts are back again. That's it. I added auth. Auth is there. And to prove it, well, one more thing, because there's one more other magical trick that I want to show. So now we can get our post editor, but we still don't want people to be able to access this unless they're logged in. So Redwood provides another magical thing called, it's a private component that we can add to our routes. So if I go over to my route file, you'll see here I have my admin post routes. So all you need to do to make those secured is we're going to add the private component and then wrap our admin set. Oop, if I could type, that would be good. And with unauthenticated home. So what this is going to do is basically tell the code where we want the users. Oh my God, I could type, that would be fine. This is going to tell the code where to send our users when they're not authenticated. So now if we come back to our app, we've already been redirected. You'll see it says redirect to home. So if I try to access that post admin again, we're just going to keep being redirected to home. So now let's log in and see our login in action. So as I said, I already added the code that makes the login button functional before this demo started. So you can see in the repo that's available how that's done, or do the tutorial. So I'm just going to log in here. That's it. Auth's done. Did that even take me 10 minutes? I don't think so.
No, you might be the only session this whole thing, of course, thanks to me, that's actually like under time. You did auth under time, Amanda. That's never been said before.
It shows you how fast it really is, though. Like once you know the flow, it takes no time to get set up, especially if you know how to configure the authentication provider you're using and all that good stuff. So now we're back in our admin. We can still create posts. We'll do third post demo success. And there's our third post. If we go back to home, and that's it, that's off. So to come back, and just real quick, I wanted to kind of go over why that happened. So when we ran the auth command, there's a is authenticated method as part of the auth, which by default returns true. This is so that when you create an app with Redwood, you don't have to worry about authentication by default, but when you do implement it, you don't have to worry about, did I remember this endpoint? Did I remember that endpoint? So it makes it really easy to have control over what's available and what's not. So yeah, that's that. So just to come back to my slideshow here. What did I do again? Just to do a quick overview. I ran the setup command. I updated my GraphQL file to use skip auth so that the blog post would render. And I added the private route to be able to authenticate the admin itself. And just the resources here, obviously the Redwood tutorial, the community, which really is fantastic. Everybody is willing to help you at any time. And I also included a link to my blog post that shows you in depth how to go implement authentication with Redwood and Auth0. And that's it. Go create stuff. Don't forget to get your stickers, because stickers are important, and who doesn't want stickers?
Amanda, thank
That's
you.
it.
That was marvelous.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. I believe that's your first Redwood.js presentation and demo. Is that correct?
That's my first presentation ever. So
what?
Lots of firsts for me.
Oh, you crushed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
It has been such a pleasure having you part of the Redwood community. And I know that you've got a lot that you've been doing recently with Redwood. There's a couple people that possibly you'll be mentoring. They wanted to become involved as a contributor, so you're going to help with that. You've also started writing docs for how-to with Auth0 and Redwood. So the thing you didn't show everyone is all the setup on the Auth0 side,
Right.
right?
I just wanted to save time for this demo because it's not too intensive, but I did outline that on my blog. So anybody can go check that out. I'll put links in the chat.
Exactly. Okay, exactly. So you have the docs for that. Give those links and I'll get that slide deck from you and I'll include that in the follow-up for this meetup. So Amanda,
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And well done. I'm now a believer. I could do auth. So
There you go.
yeah,
See,
convinced?
so easy. Anybody can do it.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
All right. Coming up next, DT and Chris Coulson, David Tierson and Chris Coulson are going to do a presentation. I have one more poll for you. We'll do this one quickly while they're getting ready. And here's the question. Let me see if this one works. We are curious how you actually hear about the Redwood. So if you would, we'll give this one 30 seconds or so. For example, how did you hear about this meetup? And I wish I could have done a little thing for other, but maybe put that in the chat because we actually don't know how people find out about Redwood news, updates, and releases. So this would help us understand where you're looking for updates. And we'll try to consolidate that in the future. Oh, podcast for me. Yeah, that's a good other. That's a good other. See, I need my background music. And the Jeopardy thing just gets old if I do it, and it's not as funny after I do it 5 times. We'll give this another few seconds. Thank you all. This is helpful information for us. And coming up next, 2 fine gentlemen that are going to be showing you. I remember some early demos of this in production application that was focused on real time. And now they've added some fancy caching. Ooh, caching. Tell me more. All right, ending the poll and handing it over to David Tierson and Chris.
Thanks. So Chris is going to be my slide helper. And we're going to talk about Redwood.js and the response cache, which is part of the Envelop plugin system. And we're going to discover all the hidden powers that you can get from GraphQL caching. So you probably built an app. You're in production, everyone's loving it, and you're getting tons of users. So great, now you built an app and you're loving it and you got tons of users and you're getting traffic spikes. And you don't want to disappoint your users with really slow performance or, you know, database connection errors or compooling errors or things that could happen. So Redwood has an answer for this, thanks to Envelop and their plugins and the ecosystem. And that answer is the response cache. So the response cache is something that helps to handle when you have huge GraphQL query operations that can slow down your server. Because what happens is each time you do queries or whatnot, you're doing database reads, or you're calling out to remote services. If you've got an extended GraphQL API that's you're pulling in and you're talking to other things. And it can help, and it's perfect for handling lots of read-only operations where your data doesn't change frequently. And if you think about your app, that's a lot of what you do. If you've got blogs or things, or if you've created information that doesn't change once it's set, and it's really popular, that read-only data is just making more access to your database that you can do in other ways. So the response cache is great for both serverful and serverless situations, because the serverful can do an in-memory cache, so it can run on your server, and serverless can run with support of a Redis-backed cache, which is great. And because it's Redis-backed, you can even have a global cache if you've got replicas, and even at the edge in certain cases, which is kind of neat. So let's unearth the caching powers that Redwood provides. First thing you're going to see is speed. You're going to see your response times drop into the low milliseconds. If you're connecting your database, no matter what happens, you've got, if you're serverless, you've got your function loading up, you've got a database connection make, you're doing querying and pulling back data. There's going to be some time. That takes time, and it takes connections. And by caching this response, by caching the data that comes back, you give yourself breathing room. You give your database the breathing room to do the hard stuff, the stuff that matters, that not necessarily matters, but the intensive things that can happen. The nice thing about the approach we have here in Redwood is that, like like everyone was saying before about being able to deploy to Netlify or Vercel or Render or everything, there's no vendor lock-in. GraphCDN is a terrific service, and it has a solution for this too. That's really quite good. But you can also manage your own, and often, and because caching, you can actually save money in certain cases because it got cut off here. But you may not have to move to a larger, pricier database that has more memory or more connection capacity right away. And if you do certain things, you can reduce the number of functions that are invoked. So the caching is good, because typically certain types of caching can be cheaper than databases. So we're calling this a super simple setup in Redwood, and Chris is going to show you how in TeamStream. Next.
Nice TM. I've got it. That was a well-placed TM, by the way.
How he saw the need for response caching and how he set it all up.
Muted. All right, cool. So yeah, I'm going to give a little bit of a background on my app and what I'm doing. So I have a production application. It's called TeamStream, teamstream.gg. And I just want to give you some information as why I might need this. I run analytics on events. We host events for content creators and other tournament organizers for video games. And with these content creators, there's a lot of players that play in these events. There's 20 teams and there's 60 players playing in this event. And we want to be able to view them and see them and find out who's playing. I don't just want to watch one player. I want to watch all the players and switch between the different views. And so that's what my app provides. And we run some analytics on the events. And just so you can get a kind of a clue of how many people are actually watching these events, like this is hosted by a content creator. And you can see that there was 136,000 people watching across all the different streams. So like this guy had 18,000 viewers. And if we're even getting 1,000 of them to come to my site, or 500 or even 200, they're hitting the database to request this giant list of players. And every time it gets hit, the event gets called, it makes a database query, it requests the teams request the players request the channels. So it can get unwieldy pretty quickly when you have 200 people that just show up on your website and start looking at and watching the event on your stream. So I'm going to do a little bit of a demo. Actually, no, first I'll show you the quick setup for how easy it is to get started with the cache. It's literally, you install 3 packages. You install the envelope, it's response cache, the response cache Redis, and the IO Redis. After you have those installed, you create the Redis instance, and you essentially copy and paste this code, probably running a generator.
Chris, could you give it the plus?
Oh, yeah.
Command plus. Thank you.
Is that better?
I think that's better. Everyone okay? I'm looking at you, chat. More plus.
More plus?
More plus.
Better.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to give that the go.
Yeah, so you create the response cache. Here I'm telling it that this is essentially 0. So I'm not caching every single thing because I'm setting it to 0 up here and the expire in seconds. But what I'm doing here is I'm per schema coordinate, I'm basically saying like, this is what I want the time to cache to be. So this is the initial auth query that we run in Redwood when you have an authenticated user. I don't want to cache that. I don't want the authenticated user to be cached. I don't want people to be able to access other people's data and whatnot. And then I cache the event query. And this is getting cached for a minute right now. And that's basically for the demo. I can run this I can set this to an hour if I wanted to, which I had been doing before, but for the demo, I set to a minute. And after you have the response cache, you simply just add it to the extra plugins and you get caching. Like it's that simple.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Let's see. How many lines is this? 29 lines of code. Yeah, 30 lines of code. You get GraphQL caching. Okay. So Yeah.
You're gonna put that in the forums, right? Because I don't even want to write 29 lines. I just copy and
Yeah,
paste.
I'm
All
waiting
right.
for the generator command for this response cache. So
Okay, maybe we could sneak that in. Don't tell Tom.
okay, and so yeah, let me kind of show you. I have a connection right here to my localhost Redis instance. I'm going to refresh this. Run this little refresh command. There should be nothing in this cache. And just to make sure that there's nothing in this cache, I will flush the cache. And if we refresh this, I keep hitting that button. All right, now I'm refreshing it. There's nothing here. If we come back over to, I'll make this even bigger. If we run here, you will now see as we refresh this, it's pending this request. And this is localhost connecting to actually my prod database. So it's kind of taking a little bit longer than it normally would, but this is taking 1.79 seconds to load, and it's connecting to the database a ton of times and making a ton of database connections. And when you have 200 people coming, it doesn't really help, and you'll run into errors and people won't be able to access your data. And so now that this takes 1.79 seconds, I can look at the preview and see that I didn't hit the cache because it wasn't cached yet, but it did cache. So now if I refresh this again, you'll see the second time it hit the cache, and the timing on this was now 281 milliseconds. So, and then if I come over here and I refresh this, you can now see that it's in my cache. I can, now I set it to 1 minute, so it uncached. Let me refresh real quick. You'll see again, took 1.26 seconds, but it's now cached. If I refresh this, I can click this and I can actually view what's in the cache on this little app that I have. And now every time I run it, it'll only take 200 milliseconds instead of a second, and it makes no database connections. So I'm in the clear. I don't have anybody timing out or not being able to view my data. And that's pretty much the response cache.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
So what's next is, and also just calling out that Tobe has tried this same response cache in a serverful mechanism because he uses serverful. And so if you just take Chris's example and get rid of the 28 lines of code, you just have, well, the 26 lines of code probably, because you'll just use the plugin without a Redis connection, and it'll use a least recently used in-memory cache. And Tobe was seeing, and he can chime in on chat, and he had a particular case where he had one very long-running query, and it was a few seconds, and it was down again into milliseconds, which was just taking a lot of load off his system. So and what's nice about the serverful one is you can use that approach in a local dev to just experiment with it, because your local is running kind of serverfully, so you can try it out right away. What's next is all the invalidations, which you can go through about how things invalidate just during mutations, or if you need to invalidate directly through Prisma middleware. Let's say you're getting a webhook and your data changes, because that's something that Chris can happen when he has a webhook that changes data as he's getting information from the various people who are sharing the events. And then just go to the last. The next thing is so yeah, if you have any questions, you can find us on Discord to ask about that. What's neat about this too is do I have the last slide?
That's the last one on here.
That's the last one. Oh, I forgot the last one. The other thing you can do is there's potential to cache this on the edge with Netlify and Vercel edge handlers, so you can even boost performance even more, that you don't have to invoke your function. So yeah, try it out. It's really
amazing.
Really, yeah, it's just easy. And for those cases where you have lots of read-only data, it's so helpful.
Yeah, I'll let David and Chris, if you would watch the chat, maybe you can field some questions there about caching. And Chris, just one question for you, because I think because it applies to the whole Redwood ethos. Are you a cache master coming into now using cache on your production app?
No, I literally talked to DT for, I don't know, 15 minutes and we had it set up and it worked. And I was like, thanks.
So the point being, I now feel like I could do caching, right? I wanted to see this.
Seriously.
And that's Redwood's approach to all these, like, kind of hairy, scary technologies, GraphQL, end-to-end authentication, right? Database queries, migrations, ORM, right? When you don't have to do the config and you can just use the tools, that feels pretty good, right?
Yeah, for real.
Well done. Excited. When's the next Team Stream event?
I think this weekend. I gotta check.
Okay.
They update them every week. So
all right, make sure we get that for the follow-up, as well as how we can follow along with news and updates for Team Stream. Thank you, gents. That was a great conversation. I'm gonna ask Rob Cameron now to and let me see. I'm sure I could help you stop sharing your screen, but DT, if you could stop sharing your screen. Rob Cameron, tell us what we've won. Oh wait, tell us what we're going to win. How to win? What are we doing, Rob? Let's do something fun.
Thank you, David. It's time for the internet's favorite tree-themed JavaScript framework quiz show, the Redwood Quiz Show. I'm your host, Rob Cameron, and today we've got a fabulous prize for each of 3 lucky contestants. Show them what to win, Rob. Thanks, Rob. Contestants will have the chance to win a fabulously soft official Redwood t-shirt, available in any color as long as it's black. This smooth, silky shirt features the Redwood logo and your choice of official logo colors, or Mysterious Midnight. My producer, David, is modeling that shirt right now. Back to you, Rob. Thanks, Rob. Contestants will have the chance to win. Oh, no, I already said that part. Let's see. The way this game works is I will ask a question. Anyone who thinks they know the answer should raise their hand in Zoom. My producer, David, will call out the first person to raise their hand, and he'll unmute them so they can give their answer. If it's correct, they win. And if not, we move on to the next raised hand. Okay, let's try a practice round. This is just to make sure this all works since we've never actually tested it.
I'm lowering all hands. No cheating. Okay, go ahead, Rob.
Okay, everyone get their raise hand button ready. Let me share my screen. This one. Okay, first question, true or false? The tallest tree on Earth is a redwood.
Ooh, that's good. Okay, so here we go. Kevin Brown, I'm allowing you to talk. You have permission. Kevin, go ahead.
I'd say the redwood is the tallest tree on Earth. I'd say true.
And the answer is true. Hyperion, which is in a secret location in the Redwood National and State Parks at 380 feet, 115 meters tall.
Oh, that's good work. Kevin, I don't know how to silence you, so just be aware if you go to the restroom, you are now on audio. All right. Now, was that a winner? Was that a, what do we do on that?
That was just a practice round. No winner.
Oh, practice round. All right.
Okay. But we're ready.
But Kevin, I've got, oh, and so the other thing too is we will follow up with you. Just make sure we have your name, but we have your email from registering on the event. You could DM me if you are a winner, if you want alternate contact. Otherwise, I'll use your email to follow up with you so that you could receive one of your fabulous prizes.
Yes. All right, we're ready. But first, let's hear a word from our sponsor. Does the JavaScript ecosystem leave you feeling like this? Maybe it's time for something new. Redwood JS. Redwood combines React with GraphQL and Prisma to make what we call an edge-ready framework for the Jamstack. Overwhelmed with Webpack and Babel configuration? Redwood's already taken care of it. Everything talks to each other out of the box, and you can use your generators to write the boilerplate, leaving you to write the fun stuff. Feeling overwhelmed trying to learn yet another JavaScript framework? Redwood has great documentation and an award-winning friendly tutorial to walk you through just about everything you can do with the framework. tutorial has not actually won any awards. So don't wait. Download Redwood in the next 30 minutes and you'll receive hundreds of NPM packages absolutely free. Redwood is under very active development and should not be considered ready for production environments. Side effects of Redwood may include decreased stress, increased job satisfaction, and a newfound sense of purpose. Visit redwoodjs.com for more information. So talk with your team today and find out if Redwood's right for your next app. Redwood. It's not just a big tree, it's your new favorite JavaScript framework.
So good, Rob. So good.
All right, and we're back. Are we ready?
Lowered hands. Hands are lowered.
Okay. Hands are lowered.
Hands are lowered.
Everyone on their raise hand button. Ready. First question. What is the version number of the latest stable release of Redwood.js? And there are 2 acceptable answers.
All right, we're going to Navi. What would you say, Navi? Oh, trying again. Talking permitted.
Oh, I'm gonna go with 1.1 or 1 point. Can I have 2 answers? 1.0, 1.0, 1.0, 1.0.
1.0 what?
RC?
RC what?
Oh my God. Oh my God. I'm stressing. Somebody help me in chat. I'm gonna go with 1.10. RC-3.
Oh, I would say that is correct. 1.0.0 RC3. We would have also accepted 0.39.3.
Oh man, Mona's gonna be so pissed at me.
All right, Navi, thank you. I know where to follow up with you afterwards. Thank you for participating. All right, you're now muted. And lowering hands, Rob.
Hands down. Are we ready? Question number 2. Name 3 major open source libraries that Redwood.js itself uses. We've had several discussions about some of those libraries today.
Okay, we've got, oh, that came in quick. Nemo. Nemo's up first.
All right. So we got Prisma, GraphQL,
yes,
and Auth0. It's not open source, is it?
No, it is not.
Mm.
One more chance.
Rob.
One more. Give him one chance for a third one. The first 2, I accept the first 2. We need one more. It's your chance. GraphQL, Prisma, and the components are created with
React. Okay.
Yes.
There you go. Good job, chat. Good job, chat.
Yes. We
Thanks,
accept
Chad.
React, GraphQL, Prisma, Jest, Storybook, TypeScript, which I don't know if that counts as technically a library more than like a specification, although there is code, I guess, to support it. ESLint, Webpack, Babel, the list goes on and on. Okay, hands down.
All right, hands down. Thank you, Nemo. I will follow up with you by the email you used to register. Thank you. All right, hands are down.
Okay, third and final question. What is one of the original names of Redwood.js? I will accept 2 answers.
Ooh.
There are 2 possible answers.
Ooh, let's see here. I'm guessing this is James Quick, or there is a James. I don't know if it's James Quick. James is at the top of the queue here. James, go ahead.
The hammer time.
That is correct. We will accept hammer and chainsaw.
Oh, you're accepting 2 answers. All right.
Yes. If you came to one of our previous community meetups, we talked about the history of Redwood and how the names changed throughout the years. Yeah, that's why the blog is the Hammer blog. It's because originally it was called Hammer, even though now it's Redwood.
Very good. Thank you, James. James and Nemo, actually, if you would send me in the chat, you can just send to me specifically your last name so I can make sure that I find you, because I may know of a few other Jameses that are in the audience today, but thank you all. That worked out. And Rob, thank you.
Yes. Congratulations to our winners. We'll get in touch with you to get your fabulous prize for 100% off an order in the Redwood shop. And this works again. Where is it? Yes, that's our show. I'm Rob Cameron, wishing you green tests and passing builds. Good night, everybody.
Oh my gosh, we will do that again. Now That's going to be hard to live up to next time around, Rob. That was amazing. Thank you. All right. Well, we have several more things to come. We have a couple more panels, and you want to stick around to the end. So let's jump in right now. Let's talk about getting involved with the Redwood JS community. And already on stage here, we have Dom, and if Alice and Kim Adeline could join. There you are. Alice, good to see you. Kim Adeline, there we are. Very good. Well, let's just dive right in. I could say a lot if I was to introduce each of you, because it's just really been a pleasure to get to know you. But I'd like other people to get to know who you are first. So let's go around, and if you would, who are you and how did you first hear about Redwood? Alice, would you go ahead first? It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. So excited to meet everyone. Hi, everybody. My name's Alice. I'm a fourth-year computer science student at University of British Columbia. So I'm actually from Vancouver, Canada. And I'm currently in my first internship at Rivian, and Rivian's an electric truck company that's aiming to keep the world of interest through, driving sustainably. So they recently launched their car. So it's really exciting, but really like how I got my first programming experience is from contributing to Redwood. And I would say that I started my first project on Redwood following the tutorials. And Rob doesn't know this, but totally fangirled when I first saw him secretly, because he has these videos on the Redwood tutorials. So it's really cool to see him in real life. I'll pass it on to Kim Adeline.
Hi everyone, I am Kim Adeline. I am also in Vancouver. It is a coincidence, it was not on purpose. I am a software engineer at Microsoft. I work on the Python extension for VS Code. So I'm in orders very far-fetched satellite connections, maybe the 7 degrees of separation kind of thing. I guess more like 4 maybe, I don't know. Then in Redwood, I started by making a few contributions, porting things to TypeScript. So I am glad you appreciate my work. Actually, we should have a counter of how many times we mentioned TypeScript in this, meetup. It's been 0 seconds so far. See how far we can go. And nowadays, I'm mostly focused on the community side of things. So you might have seen me on Discord and sometimes in the forums. Dom, your turn.
Hey everyone, Dominic Sadie, Dom and JTOR on GitHub, normally based in LA, and I'm on the Redwood core team, but it wasn't always that way. I used to do data science and Python, and I didn't know anything about the web really. And I think I was following Paul Graham because I was into startups, and he retweeted a guy named Tom who I knew nothing about at the time, and he saying he was doing this web framework, and it seemed like a great place to learn because it was just so hard to put all the pieces together. It's do I learn Vue? Do I learn Svelte? And then they don't even talk about the API. So Redwood was just happened to be the perfect way to learn kind of how to get into the modern web. And I just wrote it out, and I'm still here.
Yeah, definitely still here, Dom. It's been really fun to get to connect with you all. Dom and Kim Adeline being on the core team, Alice helping us out in a lot of different ways. What I want to do now is show for each of you an early or even your first contribution. Redwood is an open source project, and we love having people participate. We work really hard to make it possible to participate in the project, and we can't say enough that you are invited if you want to contribute to the Redwood project. If this is your first time to contribute to open source, we would love to have you. So Dom, I'm going to share my screen now, and the wizard of JS that you are, let's show your first. Where did it go over here? Your first project you did, thousands of lines of code. You rewrote the brand new features, right? Tell us about this PR, Dom.
Yeah, so it turns out after you git clone a node project, you have to run yarn, but they had that in the docs. But what they didn't have was yarn build, because they go in that order and you can't screw it up. So made sure that was in there. I think this is a total of 3 words I added to the contributing docs, which is and run yarn build. So I didn't know to do that, and hopefully I cleared the way for somebody else, but I was super new, super green. I'm pretty sure that guy who said looks good now works for Dino, and the other guy has an awesome startup. So it's been a minute for sure, but this was pretty funny.
That was great. I remember Dom got to be known as the docs guy, but the reason we brought this up and we did plan this was because docs are critical and they're incredibly important, as important as the code. And to that end, it's a great way to get started with Redwood as a contributor is to do a doc. And then you wanted me to show this as well, Antonio. And we get, yeah, go ahead, Dom. You want to say something about this one?
Oh yeah, this is just like one of my favorite examples of contributing, just because I feel like it's a little postcard he sends us every week of like the typo fixes, and we're almost like pen pals where we look forward to just this PR coming in. So, you know, this is just like, it's really just like spell check almost, but it's awesome. Like I always look forward to it, and you don't need to contribute code or anything. It'd be as simple as this, but like we'll always get to know you even from these little commits, and it's just a lot of fun. And this was a great example.
Thanks, Dom. Kim Adeline, not coming into the project as a JavaScript full stack app developer, but this was your first one. And I remember being very wowed by the spectacular use of emojis.
Yeah, so I guess a little bit of context here. So how I discovered Redwood. So I was in the Slack workspace for Cascadia JS, which was a JavaScript TypeScript conference. And one day they didn't, like, I think they retweeted Tom or something. Or maybe it was a post on the forum on Redwood, like asking for help with TypeScript. And I work with TypeScript like on a daily basis. So like, sure, I can come over and take a look. And I started chatting on the forum with everybody, seeing what's needed. And I'm like, yeah, maybe I should give it a try. And then go on the repo. I was like, oh, okay. And there were a few things to be done at the time. I think, yeah, some generators had to be converted to TypeScript, and we had to offer like TypeScript and JavaScript options. So you see the arguments in the CLI. It was interesting to jump into the project because even though I do TypeScript, I don't do full stack web development. So I was like, oh, how does it work again? React. It's been a little while, so it was interesting. And I also really like emojis. So as you can see, I did not hold back when it came to using emojis and the title headers. Yeah, so it's mostly converting a component from JavaScript to TypeScript. Being maybe a little bit too verbose. You can see like my comment message is super long, but I have a little bit too much info than not enough. Yeah, that was my very first contribution to Redwood. It was a year and a half ago.
Yeah,
was it?
Isn't that amazing?
Oh my God, it's been a year and a half ago.
Amazing. And now on the Redwood core team, helping us out with community. And a few things I love about this is that you brought your skills to the project, which was TS, and not being a JavaScript expert and not doing full stack development, like none of that, right? I'm sure there's always the like, oh, how am I going to do? Can I open a PR here? Will they welcome me? Like all those emotional questions come with doing a PR, but I love that you brought your skills and made some really valuable contributions to our full TypeScript support.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And Alice, go ahead. Which here's the one. I know there were a couple early ones, but here's the one that I remember, and I just thought, oh my gosh, will Alice ever come back and help us out again? When we met, Alice at a contributing workshop was the first time, which I also thought when you joined in on a contributing workshop, I thought, oh no, have I scared Alice away forever? Will she ever come back?
Well, it is quite intimidating for a beginner. So like I said, I have had no experience coding prior to, like being part of Redwood. I think being a computer science student, like you learn very little about coding and there's very little collaboration with other engineers, maybe a little bit with my classmates. So contributing to Redwood was an amazing opportunity to work with amazing real engineers. And for me, it was really intimidating going into the code base, but I saw that David had posted on the forums that there's still opportunity to contribute to like a splash page like this, where I thought, okay, this would be separate from the bigger code base where I can kind of take on myself. I thought it was going to be simple like HTML, CSS, but this ended up being a huge PR, and I learned so much from it. And specifically, like first, I think just the length of this PR goes to show like the amount of collaboration. I got to collaborate with not only the Redwood team who gave me tons of feedback as we iterated throughout. But also I actually got to collaborate with another contributor. So as I started on this, somebody else jumped in and said that he had some great ideas. So we kind of, like worked on this PR together. And through all that, it was actually deployed. And now I actually just downloaded a new Redwood project just to see how it will look. And I just can't believe that that's something I worked on, being somebody with very little experience. And it's also really great to see in the comments, everyone saying small contributions count, whatever that may be. So that's definitely true. And it comes in many forms.
So fun. And Alice, everyone jumped in on this one. It was important, right? Tom, myself, Rob, Sam collaborating with you. Just great. This is how open source works. And it was really fun. And you just jumped all in. You hung on for the process, and it's just a pleasure. So thank you. Thank you each for sharing some of your experience getting started. I want to invite anyone and everyone that can attend. Next week, I'll be posting this link as well. I'll be doing another contributing workshop. It'll be in Discord this time. If you would like to take your first step to learn how to contribute to the Redwood project, this is the place to come and do it. And by the way, we didn't have time to talk about it, but code and docs are wonderful, but participating in the community and supporting other people, sharing presentations and talking about Redwood. Kim Adeline had a story she could tell about that. Those are all incredible ways you can contribute back to the project. So we welcome all of that, and we would love to help you get started as a contributor. Thank you all so much. So talking more about community, we're going to invite, actually here they are, Keith and Kurt, and they're going to be talking about other ways you can get involved in the Redwood community as a creator of projects. We are going to be going over time a bit today. We have 2 more things after this. So we'll go a little bit over time, but it is so worth it. And if you stick around to the very end, I promise I have a little treat for you. It may involve a little bit more Rob Cameron, I think, but please stick around. Keith and Kurt, I'd love to hand it over to you. 2 gentlemen I've also gotten to know just because of the Redwood community. So welcome. Over to you, Keith and Kurt. Tell us who you are.
Cool. Thanks, David Price. I'll kick off and hand it off to my buddy Kurt, who's on the other side of the planet. I'm Keith from Alaska. And so Kim, Adeline, and Alice, I fly over you about once a month on my way to Seattle, but one day I'll stop at British Columbia. But I'm way up north, and I am in the bucket of intentionally developing my own project, that category that was the biggest category. I've got a day job. I'm an engineer at an energy company, and development coding is my hobby. It's not my job, so I don't get a whole lot of time, and I'm going solo, so I need help. I need all the help I can get. I've got one kind of app in production under my belt. It was a Gatsby app with YAML chaos, AWS backend. So I know the pain, and I know I need help, and that's what attracted me to Redwood, and also how we ended up making what we call the Maker Hour. It's a little weekly venue where we gather as folks building something cool with Redwood, because that's a fundamental goal of our shop, of our project, is to help startups kick off and thrive, or help individual, say, side projects kick off and thrive. It's a key goal. And the Maker Hour is a weekly venue where we gather as individuals to talk shop and encourage each other to make progress on their apps. So it's fun. It's a neat opportunity to talk live. We meet on Discord, and I look forward to it. And I host it, and it turns out to be, a time when most or the other side of the planet is asleep. So Kurt is kicking off the same thing on, say, more Australia lunchtime. So Kurt, over to you.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Keith. Yeah, my name is Australia. My name is Kurt. I live in Australia. Don't get that confused. Yeah, and so I've been involved in the Maker Hour that Keith has been leading, and yeah, we thought it'd be cool if I showed you the project I was working on in Maker Hour. So I'll just share my screen. Can we see that? Can I get a nod from someone?
Looking good.
Getting a nod from David. Yep, sweet. So yeah, this is a project that I built alongside with some help. So it is called CAD Hub. What is it? Well, the best way to think of it is it's like a cross between, say, Code Sandbox and Thingiverse, in that it's a repository of a whole bunch of 3D parts. 3D printing is pretty common. However, everything is defined with code. So if we just take one, we'll have a look at this stackable plywood shelf by Roni here. And the coolest thing is we'll jump straight into the online IDE. So that is, this part here is completely defined with this code here on the left. And I mean, if you know anything about 3D modeling, you might know that like this is an absolutely bonkers way to make 3D parts. And it is for sure. It's like a bit of a niche for us, but there are also some big benefits. So definitely when you need to make changes to something that's been 3D modeled, they can often be pretty brittle, even with so-called parametric parts. Like whenever you need to change something, then things can break. But when you're defining stuff with code, because you have like the semantic description of what actually makes a part, you can put in whatever logic you need to make it quite robust. So like a function where you add your input parameters, you can do the exact same thing with 3D parts. So like this user has given the exploded view, so we can change to that, change back, or if we want to change the width, then we can do that. And these parts are typically very robust changes. So and then well, this isn't much of a 3D printable part, but you can download the STL so that you can print it or what have you. So yes, it's definitely a little bonkers, but yeah, we're hoping to, like, the way I see it is software is taking over the world. Software is taking over the world. That's like self-evident, but I also think software development is taking over the world. Like dev tools are getting so good, and Redwood is a huge part of that. But like I want to bring that to mechanical developers as well. So there's like a bit of a long-term vision, but we're also just here making a whole bunch of customizable parts. So yeah, like if anyone wants to get involved with this particular project as well, a couple ways to do that. But so like one, you can just sign up. We also have like, so come to this homepage. I'll link it in the chat, cadhub.xyz. But yeah, we have a Discord as well and a couple other things to get involved. But I'd say if there's one takeaway, like definitely if you're interested at all in this paradigm of making 3D parts, check out this tutorial, Getting Started with OpenSCAD, because that is, you'll know if you're hooked or not on this weird way of making 3D parts if you do that. But I'd also say this is an open source project. So if you do the Redwood tutorial and you want to try contribute to a live Redwood app, then more than welcome. We have about 23 developers. I think like our ratio of stars to contributors is pretty good. We have a lot of people contributing, a lot of passionate people. So that's really, really great. And yeah, I guess I also wanted to talk about like how my experience has been building this with Redwood. And I was trying to think of something specific, but the overwhelming feeling is just like how easy Redwood makes it, how much it gets out of the way. And I thought, like, David and Tom are giving me the honor of speaking here. Of course, I'm going to say something nice. So I thought a good way I was bringing up some evidence of, I actually do feel this way. So like, here's a tweet from over a year ago. And the sentiment here is like, you see these hot take blog posts about this project versus that project. And I think those things are like Vue versus React is such a petty thing to talk about when you get so much value from all the pieces working together, the integration value from Redwood. And similarly, like, basically the sentiment I feel every day working on Redwood is I'm loving it because I can just get on with building my app. So yeah, that's been really great. And yeah, and so I think for me, we're originally talking about the Maker Hour is I was really keen to get involved with that because building something can be a bit lonely, and having people to talk to, as well as like a bit of soft accountability. I said I was going to do this last week, and did I in fact do it? It's really nice to have that. So I would say, yeah, get involved. And I thought a good way to show you is how to do that. So Keith mentioned we're on Discord. So the way to do that is if you're on the Redwood homepage up here on the top right, that's how you get to Discord chat. And then when you're in Discord, you just need to make your way to the Maker Hour chat. and within that you'll find the events where you can talk to people and get involved. So we do a weekly meeting, and sort of one of our announcements we wanted to announce is a second meetup. So you know, I'm in Australia. It can be a bit rough for me to try and find a good time. So we're now having a second one. The time is a little tentative. We're looking like we're going to aim for 5:30 p.m. Australian time, or Eastern Australian time, which is 6:30 in the morning UTC time. But yeah, we'll get an event in here, but swing by and get involved.
Awesome. Kurt, yeah, thanks. One quick addition. Everyone's welcome anytime. That's the theme. You may come and you may go. I've had the great pleasure of hanging out with many of you through this menu. And it's okay if you have a season, maybe a few weeks, where you come, or maybe you come once a month. But whatever it is, you're always welcome anytime. No pressure. It's just a good thing. So, and Kurt, it's a joy that you're kicking off on the other side of the planet, and we need more. It's my hope that this is a good thing. It's fun, and it just kind of hives off, and many more of these help spin off to help keep momentum going on your side project or your startup, whatever it is. So thanks for the time, Mr. Price.
Gentlemen, thank you. It's so amazing to watch people in the community helping each other be successful with their projects in Redwood. And there are countless stories I could tell of people that got their start on something that feels really big now, right? But it was developing as a solo dev, but in the community and alongside others in the community. So they were on a team and collaborating. And Kurt, you're not only doing that with an open source project, but then you're doing that with the Redwood community as well. So do check out, we linked to it in the chat, do check out CAD Hub, and do look forward. We're getting fancy with Discord events, but look for Discord events coming up, and there's little bots you can just subscribe to events that'll be happening weekly. We'll be using that more. And thank you both for helping to make that happen. It's going to have ripple effects throughout the community and getting people started. So really appreciate it. Tom, I think we're over to you, and we're in overtime, but Tom, we want to hear about GraphQL.
All right, well, I'll do a quick version that doesn't go through everything, but I wanted to show off directives a little bit more. Amanda went into that a little bit and showed you some of the very, very basics, but I'll dig into that just a smidge more. So let me get some sharing done. All right. Here we go. So I have a Redwood application here on the left, and it's a simple music application. So let me show you the schema for that to orient you a little bit. So here we go. We have artists and we have albums, and an artist has ID, name, email, and a list of albums, and albums have a title, a number of likes, and an artist that it makes that album.
Tom, could you give that a command, bump the font size? I think did you just do it?
You want more? I don't get to see much.
Okay.
We'll see if we can go with it. Okay.
Okay.
We'll make this a little bit. We'll reduce that. All right. So there's the schema, and I've already run the generators on this to create the scaffolds for them on the API side and on the website, but I'm just going to be showing off the API side. So in source, you'll see the SDL here for artists. This is going to look pretty normal to you if you've done GraphQL before. So artists reflects the same information, returns album, returns a list of albums. And we've got the queries for artists and getting a single artist, same on albums. So none of this should be very surprising, but this is how it works in Redwood. This was all generated for me, pretty much. I didn't have to write this when I wrote the scaffolds. But the nice thing about Redwood is that it makes it easy to go in here and modify and change this, where if you're using something like an auto-generated GraphQL front end to a database, you're not going to get a lot of opportunities to really modify that. So if you want to have full control over your GraphQL API and your business logic, then Redwood's going to make that really easy to get in here and customize this. So one thing I did was I created this pop albums function to get back just the popular albums sorted by the number of likes. And how do you implement that? Well, that happens here in the services. So if we look at albums, then we can see that getting albums is just a Prisma call. Find many on albums. Popular albums is going to then do an order by likes and give me the first 10 of those. So this is how you implement things with Redwood. This is the standard flow. You have a GraphQL query that you want to make and consume on your front end. And this is how you implement them on the back end. You have your SDL that defines it. You have your service that implements it. And that's kind of where it's at. But what I wanted to show you today mostly is how to use directives and how to create your own directives. So we have a directives folder within API source directives. And you'll see in here the two default directives that come out of the box. And that's require auth and skip auth that you saw before. And if we look at that, we see that this is a pretty simple file. All it does is have a schema that it exports. And this tells GraphQL how to actually use this thing. And require auth can take a roles argument. So you can actually pass arguments in your SDL, which is super cool. And then you have the implementation of one of these directives. And here, this is a validation directive, which means that it's going to either prevent or allow you to run a specific query or mutation or have access to a specific field. And this one just calls the require auth directive here. It imports it from source lib auth, require auth. So we can trace that and see exactly how this works and how you would modify this. And in here we have require auth, which calls is authenticated. Is authenticated just returns true. So I haven't installed any authentication on this application yet. That's what Amanda showed. So when you run a setup auth command, like setup auth 0, it's going to, most of the work of what it's going to do is come in here and make this thing for real. It's going to hook up this function to auth 0, whatever your third-party provider is, and it's going to add a bunch of code to this file. And of course, if you want more control, you can do anything you want in here. So let me show you that this actually works by running a command. So let's say I want to get a list of albums, and I'm going to get back the ID and the name, sorry, not a name, title of each of those albums. So indeed, this function does work and returns back the data that we want. So let's say I don't want to, let's say I'm gonna make believe that I'm installing authentication and disable it. Or you know what, I'm actually gonna skip that because we're low on time. And if you want to see more of this, so I actually have another talk that I'm giving today at GraphQL Galaxy at right around noon. So if you want to see a more in-depth version of this with also how you actually generate the GraphQL and stuff, jump over there and check that out. That's in like an hour and a half. So I'm going to skip that because Amanda actually showed that earlier today. So you're like, I've already seen that. I know how that works. And so you know how skip auth works. Like if you go to the SDL for albums, you can change this to skip auth if you want it to do that, right? So we've already covered the authentication stuff. So what if I want to make my own directive? What if I want to have a directive that, for instance, on this pop albums call, let me run that because it's a little bit shorter. It returns 10 things. Let's say I want to have, what if I want to limit that based on whether you're a subscriber or not? So maybe in my service, eventually I want to have subscriptions and that's going to limit you. So if you don't have a subscription, you're only going to get, let's say, 3 of the top 10 pop albums. And I want to be able to add that to my SDL. Well, because we're Redwood, we have a generator for that. So I can type yarn redwood generate directive. And this is, I'm going to call it sub limiter because it's a limiter based on a subscription. And if I run that, then it's going to ask me a question about what kind of directive I want. There's 2, like I said before, validators. So require auth and skip auth are both validator directives. They either accept or reject a request. But there's another type called transformer that is going to allow you to modify the return of a field or a query. So I'm going to say it's a transformer directive, and it's going to generate that for me, and it's going to put it in the directives directory here, and sublimiter will look at the code for that. So it's generated for me most of what I need to do to make it work. There's a bunch of log statements in here that you can safely ignore, but we have the schema that it exports, which is what you call this thing. This is how you actually use it. So I'll just copy that for later. And then you have the implementation. And really, here's the bulk of it. You get in a context if you want to use it. So your current user, if you're authenticated, is going to be on there and some other stuff. And then you get a resolved value. And that is the value that GraphQL has already resolved your thing to. So in the case of pop albums here, this whole thing here is what the resolved value is. Now we want to get in the middle of that. And so you can think of directives as a kind of a middleware in a way. I want to get in the middle of that response and change it. And so the generated thing here gives you an example of what you might want to do. If this was a string, now this is not a string, this is an array, so this isn't going to work. But we can do something like slice and say, just give me the first 3 of those back. And so now I have a transformer directive, as easy as that, right? Like to create these directives takes almost no effort. And then to apply them also takes almost no effort. So this was called the sublimiter directive. We'll wait for the server to reload here. And when that is applied, if I wrote it correctly and I execute this, now I'm limited to only 3 results. So again, this is the kind of middleware things that you can do. And I typed what, like 10 characters to implement that, right? I ran a generator and I wrote a couple of characters to implement it. And that's really how easy Redwood makes it to do these directives. So because it was so fast, I'm going to do another one. I have emails in my artist. So I have an artist SDL here that has emails in it. What if I wanted to redact those emails unless you're an admin or something, right? I'm not going to implement the check for whether you're an admin or not, but you can imagine how that would work. But again, I'm going to type a generator here, and this time I'm going to call it masked email. And that's going to generate me another one of these directives. Oops, it's going to be a transformer directive. And masked email is the same kind of thing. Here's the implementation. And we create a test for you as well, so that when you run your test, we'll test this thing. And of course, you have to write that. Now, this one is a string. The resolved value is the email address. So let me first actually write the query for this. Artists. And I'm going to get back. Let's get back the name and the email. And then to replace that, I'm gonna say, well, I'm gonna replace any word character globally with just a star. And this thing is, what do we call this thing? Masked email. And so I'm going to apply that onto my artists thing here. And you can actually have multiple of these. If you wanted if you wanted another thing that manipulated the string, you could have masked email, and then you could have another directive that would take the result of that and then modify it further. So you can now actually have multiple of these on your GraphQL schema that gets in the middle. So let's see, I'll run this and, oh, there we go, ta-da! We've now redacted the emails. And if I wanted to make this more intelligent, I could come in here and I could say, if context.current_user.whatever is admin, has role or whatever, is admin, then do this, otherwise do nothing. So you can put whatever logic you want in here. I don't have any of that stuff, so I'm not going to implement that. But you can see how easy it is to create directives with Redwood, which is, if you go and you try to do this on your own with like Apollo server, like it's going to take you a couple of days to probably figure this out, because it took us many more days than that to figure it out and make it really usable. But this is the work that Redwood does for you. This is kind of the thesis statement of Redwood, is to make this kind of stuff easy and extensible. You can go in and you can modify any of this. All of this stuff is open, and that's why we put these things. This is why we put require auth and skip auth in your code base, so that if you want to, you can modify them to your heart's content. When you install auth, it modifies them for you. But of course, you're free to make them do whatever you want. And when you're building something real, you need that kind of flexibility. You need to be able to know that you can go in there and change stuff when it suits your use case. You don't want to be bound by a framework that's trying to do too much for you. And it's always this middle ground of trying to do a lot, but not box you in to opinionated things that you are not going to be okay with down the road. And that is where Redwood lives. And that's a little bit of a taste of how that works with GraphQL directives.
Amazing. GraphQL team, amazing. The guild collaboration, amazing. I couldn't do, I mean, I wouldn't even set it up. That's the thing. You say like how long it would take to set it up, but I wouldn't set it up. There's just no way.
Well, and the other way to like thinking about authentication and making sure that your GraphQL, so you have a GraphQL endpoint that is public because obviously it has to be in order for your app to work. But then thinking about every one of your queries and mutations and ensuring that it's going to be secure and people aren't going to be able to do random administrative things without you knowing that that's the case. As an application developer, you really want to know that your app is secure and that when you create a new piece of functionality, you're not going to accidentally create it and make it open to the world. And so every query and mutation must have a directive associated with it, a validation directive. And so you can't forget, you can't deploy your application. It just won't start. It has to have either a require auth or a skip auth or some other custom auth type of a validator directive on it, and all the generators put them on there. And that's why even when you haven't installed authentication, it still runs it through the require auth that returns true, so that when you are ready to do it, it's there and you don't have to go back and try to figure out like, oh, where are all of my things that do things that might need to be secured? It's all ready for that. It's all completely ready to be authenticated.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you everyone for sticking around. Oh man. And I tell you, I'm not kidding. There's even more people that I wish we would have had time to bring up and just talk about the Redwood experience. You're all my favorite. The core team, thank you to everyone who contributed to make V1RC happen. Well done. What an amazing journey. And there's just more to come. So thank you. I was so excited to have this meetup, to show so many projects and people behind this project, and to just say that we've hit a really major milestone with Redwood, and the next final step is to come. But well done and thank you. So we have one more thing for the 48 attendees and 11 panelists that stuck around. Rob, what's the one thing for those that went here into overtime with us?
Yeah, we wanted to thank everybody for sticking with us through this. What is it, 2 years, 2.5 years to get to 1.0? For context, all of this hair was brown when we started. Now half of it's white. And for coming to these community meetups and everyone that joins up and helps us out and opens PRs and issues, and thank everybody. So we want to give everybody half off anything in the shop. If you use this code here, you can use that link, or if you just remember that code, December Community, we'll give you half off anything in the shop that you want. Thanks, everybody.
How long do we have, Rob?
I mean, I don't usually put an end date on it. Forever, I guess.
All right.
Oh, some people have some stuff there. And thanks to Tom for providing all of this swag for everybody. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here. I mean, so like, this is a funny thing. Like, why do we do this? Like, building a web framework is a huge pain in the ass. Like, why did I want to do this in the first place? Part of me wanted to do it just because it was hard and I like doing hard things. But the biggest part is because I want to help people build stuff easier. And it's amazing to me that so many of you have come along and believed in that mission and wanted to help with that, and saw the value of kind of stitching this stuff together and doing the work once so that everybody else doesn't have to do it over and over, only badly. And that, I love that. I love working on hard stuff with awesome people and creating value in the world. So it is my pleasure to provide some, discounted or free swag, every once in a while. Like, it's the least I can do to say thanks to all the amazingness that this community has brought. And during the pandemic, right? Like, we really started in earnest. We launched this thing in March of 2020, right after COVID kind of started. And it's been really an amazing way to connect and make new friends and build a community of people where getting together in person has been really hard. So thank you all for being a part of this amazing journey.
All right. And I would say with that code in particular, please don't share that beyond this community. That was for you on the meetup. But we do love helping people get swag. So just follow up with Rob, myself, or Tom directly. And for your community, if you want to spread the Redwood word and provide a discount, we'd love to have that conversation with you. So let's do it that way. And I think that's it. It's a wrap. We didn't have time for discussion questions from people. It's been a while. Should we give this 10 minutes of just, if anybody has any questions to chat, or are we just done here? I always want to hang out. I never want it to end. So why don't we do this? Please bow out. It's been a lot of minutes so far. I'll stick around 10 or 15 minutes. If you have discussion, we can flip you over to audio, and we'll go from there. But yeah, thank you all. Please, no pressure to stick around. But if anyone has some follow-up questions, I'd love to chat. Look for the forum post this afternoon and the tweeter from the Redwood JS account with the recording for this, as well as all the links and things to follow up. Everyone that helped out today, thank you so much. It really was a pleasure. Amanda, the hat looks good on you.
I mean, unfortunately with the green hair, I always look like Christmas, but it's okay.
Well, now it's appropriate.
Yeah.
There we go, exactly.
Tis the season. If anyone does have some questions, even wants to join on stage, just raise your hand over in the attendees, and that's the easiest way for me to throw you in. Oh yeah, very little about the front end. That's a great anonymous attendee question. Yeah, here, someone take this one, and then I'll get Isaac on stage. So many features around back end part, very little about the front end today. Great question. What are the front end goodies? Wow, that's a great question. And yeah, who wants to jump in on that?
There are a lot of front end goodies, but I'll say one of them is we really think about Redwood as an end-to-end framework. So if you use the front end with the back end, then you get things like declarative data fetching with a feature we call cells, where you can just say what your GraphQL query is, and then say what you want to be rendered on success, what you want to be rendered when it's loading, what you want to be rendered when it fails, what you want to be rendered when it's your data fetch is empty. All of these things become a more declarative, really easy to understand kind of a process. So that's one feature that's indicative of this whole thing. But there's really a ton on the front end. A lot of it is just patterns. Where do you put your files? That becomes standardized in a Redwood context so that when you add team members, everyone knows where everything is supposed to go, and we'll continue creating those patterns throughout the Redwood. As Redwood evolves and becomes capable of even bigger things, like we'll have to create some more of these types of patterns to get there. But really on the front end, like that is kind of the thing that you do. You write cells that fetch data and you render them onto your page. I mean, that's what we do as web developers, right? Like you fetch data and you draw rectangles, right? So if we can make both of those parts easy, then we make your life easy. And of course, then you have to deal with all of the stuff that comes from deploying. You need all your logging and everything, and design, like how do you help the design phase? And so we integrate Storybook for that. So a lot of the front end stuff actually is not in the framework. It's not part of the production deploy, but testing and Storybook. And what is all of the work that you have to do to create an application, not just the code that you write, but the other tasks that come around it.
Isaac,
the forms. Yeah, good answers here. The form, like really great things to help you create forms, because that's another thing that we do as web developers. Like you get data from the user, you put data into the database, you get data back out, and you put it on the screen.
And one other feature of the front end, which is often overlooked, but every app needs it, is SEO and metadata head tags. So you've probably used React Helmet, or maybe you've used React Helmet before. So Redwood packages that up so you can automatically and very easily add any Open Graph tags for your titles, your descriptions, Open Graph images, so that when you do pre-rendering and things like that, exactly, to help with social image sharing and whatnot. So that's a great feature too that you just get.
Good. Isaac, thanks I wasn't sure what would happen when I clicked panelists. So thank you for braving the video on stage, but please go ahead. Welcome, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone for the presentations. So I know we've heard Redwood described sometimes kind of as like Rails for JavaScript, which is very attractive to me because I'm using Rails right now, and it would be nice to just have everything in JavaScript and not have my front end JavaScript, my back end in Ruby. So I'm just wondering, what if we're thinking about like Rails as of Redwood as Rails for JavaScript, what is it still missing that Rails has? Like if I wanted to switch out from Rails to Redwood, is there anything that I would be like, wouldn't quite be there yet?
Or what does it have that Rails doesn't?
Yes, that is there too.
Turns out there's some Rails developers here on the stage right now. I'll let one of them jump in and lead with. No, Tom, I'm gonna let you lead. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to pass it to Rob because I think Rob has an interesting experimental bit of news that you might be interested in.
Well, you wouldn't have Ruby. That's one major downside. And until 2 or 3 weeks ago, you wouldn't have Active Record. But I have an experimental package in there right now. We're calling it Redwood Record. You may have seen it. There's a post on the forums that sort of announces it has a little quick start. And then we have docs on the main site. If you do the docs on the left-hand nav, you go down to Redwood Record, you'll see the interface, which feels very Active Record-ish. We don't have more complex stuff like joins, and you can't do greater thans, less thans, but it's very early stages, very simple. But you can jump through relationships. You can get, you get your current user, get your posts for your current user, find the first 3 posts. You can do that really Active Record-like. We don't have Active Mailer, right? That's like a mail interface. I think, was it Rails 6 just added like incoming mailer processing? We don't have that. We don't have background job. That's kind of tough to do because we kind of started in the whole Jamstack world, and you couldn't have asynchronous background jobs because your process runs long enough to run your function, then it's just gone forever. So we create a service. We have a service called repeater.dev. If you go there, it's kind of a free, right now it's free background job processing system. So you can put a job in there. You can do it, talk to it with GraphQL through your APIs. You can talk to it from the Redwood app, schedule a job, say run every 5 minutes or run at midnight once a week. And it'll call a serverless endpoint on your app for you and then show you the result. Anything else major, Tom? I can't really think of.
Well, I think so. We talked about pre-rendering, being able to pre-render pages really easily by the route, based on the routes file. You just put pre-render in there and then we'll pre-render that page. That's not suitable for all pages. So one thing that's really common in Rails is to do a lot of cache directives within your views. We don't have a lot of fine-grained caching like that yet. And it's going to look different in Redwood, our caching strategies. But once we get post 1.0, a lot of the things that we're going to do are going to be around performance, because that's what I expect a lot of people using Redwood are going to start complaining about is like, I need this type of caching. I need this type of pre-rendering. I need this type of server-side rendering. So we'll embark upon a journey of discovering what those are in an effort that we've been calling Redwood at Scale. And they all look like some kind of caching. So different caching characteristics, we've only scratched the surface of those, and a lot of those will come post 1.0.
Yeah, and to say too, we are not trying to be the Rails for JavaScript. We are heavily influenced by Rails, but Redwood set out to take things that had been learned, building applications on JavaScript and the conventions of Rails, right? And bring those to modern infrastructure, modern UI, right? So someone just asked a question, is it just a Jamstack framework? Well, it's actually both, right? It's serverless first architecture. You could deploy to the edge Jamstack, or you could run on traditional hosting, long running, persistent. You could do that without changing your code base at all. Redwood testing will blow your mind out of the box. I mean, I don't even know how to describe the integration we've done for tests from front to back with services, with scenarios, with mocks, with a test DB, and all you do is run yarn Redwood test, and your generators do test files, right? So the deployment, how you deploy is much different because we use a Jamstack like deployment, but that gives us some power at deploy time. And I can't understate how incredible the Storybook integration is out of the box, and the things you can do, especially if you're on a team, with design first via stories that have mocks and states because of cells and because Redwood thinks about your whole data lifecycle, like with your initial code base install, that you could fire up a Redwood app and the first thing you do is mock something with Storybook and then work backwards into your API, right? Like, that's kind of crazy, and we need to demo that more. That's on David Tierson and I but that's the kind of stuff that Redwood has that other frameworks don't. And not that they couldn't, but they just didn't do the config to make all that work out of the box. You should totally try it. Welcome, Isaac. Peter, we should probably go because there's other things happening, but Peter has joined us on this daunting stage. Peter, welcome.
Thanks. Quick question. So I'm evaluating basically Redwood and Remix for a next version of a publishing platform that I'm running. And basically what I've been trying to figure out is, okay, do you build on Redwood and then hook up like something like Next as a front end talking to the GraphQL, or do you build on Redwood and hope that by the time you're done building it, the caching story and stuff is there for performance? And then Remix came out open source and it was like, oh man, I have to evaluate Remix versus Redwood. And I'm assuming much of the audience actually probably has that question in their minds, what Remix versus Redwood. And I mean, I'm a Rails guy. And so for me, Redwood was like, okay, good. I know where to put things like API, web, yada, yada, yada. Like, and that's the big sell for me with Redwood is that. But in terms of, if you're looking at building a storefront where you have to basically, like right now we rely on page caching everything, right? And so if you're thinking about, okay, I get like for a logged in user story, I totally know how I would do everything in Redwood right now. But if you're thinking about, okay, well, what do I want for like, and this is serverful, like storefront stuff, are you just like cache like how do you, what you know what I'm getting at? Like what would approach would you take if you're building, like trying to ship something like 6 months out now with Redwood?
Well, I think from the caching perspective, you're going to go a long way with GraphQL caching strategy, either using something like GraphCDN, a service that makes it super easy to set up, or you use what was shown off today to be able to cache at the data layer, which has some really nice advantages over generating HTML and caching that. Like, you know that you're always going to get fresh interface for it. You get your canned data, you're not hitting the database. And so you can get some really excellent scale that way. So I think there are mechanisms currently within Redwood that will allow you to do the kinds of caching that you would need to get to where you are. Of course, you're going to want to probably refine certain ones of those, and maybe you do want to really generate it. Like, it really depends. Like, you can statically render a page and have it hydrated.
Some performance problems with the Redwood
with just the extras. And so there's a couple of different strategies right now. So, and I think we'll really be aggressively working on those early next year. So I'd say, do the tech evaluation, look at what matters to you the most. I think if you ever think that you'll create another type of a client for your application, being able to use GraphQL via Redwood is going to be a huge win for that. And that's a lot of applications. That's really why we use GraphQL, because it acts as this interface to where it's like, oh, you want a mobile app? Like, if you're using something that's not using GraphQL, then you're going to end up trying to consume a REST API in a kind of a hacky way with Rails. And then you're gonna be like, man, I'd really like to use GraphQL because I'm building my mobile app with React Native or something, and GraphQL just fits so naturally with React. And so then you're like, oh, well, I guess I'll now add a GraphQL API to my Rails application. And now you've implemented your business logic twice. And it's just, I've done this several times, and it's just not super awesome. So I'd say, do the evaluation, certainly, if different technologies are better for different use cases. And it's without having an hour-long conversation about your use case, it's hard.
I went down the path of trying to add a GraphQL API to an existing Rails thing, and it was just like, you know what, starting over and looking at building ground up is something that we're looking at doing. And so I was just I wasn't like looking to, this isn't like a Remix versus Redwood flame bait. Like Redwood appeals to me a lot because of the design thing. What I was really getting at is, if you're looking at building a front end, like if you're looking at something that is going to be aggressively cached, is what I'm really saying is hooking up Next to Redwood crazy? Like, in terms of for the thing that's heavily cached, and then using Redwood, like vanilla Redwood for everything else.
Yeah, so
several
like Danny,
startups you saw use Next as a client.
Yeah, so Danny uses Next for some of the server side rendering that he needs for distributing the kind of the recordings, the tape recordings that he does. So you can totally do it. I mean, it's GraphQL, right? Like, this is the beauty of having the backend being GraphQL. You get the beauty of the tight integration with Redwood if you want it, but if you need certain parts of your site to perform in a different way, in ways that Redwood doesn't currently offer, or just forever because a different type of a method works better for you, it's not weird at all, I think, to match up Next with Redwood. Like we offer there's the front end, there's the back end. Like some people use one or the other. Many people use both. But at the end of the day, if you want to do GraphQL on the back end, like Redwood's an amazing way to do that, a better way to do that than I've seen anywhere else.
Thank you very much, by the way.
Yeah,
Thanks for all of you.
I had two quick things I want to share with you. DT, were you going to chime in quickly, or I was just going to show him Toby's work?
Just very quickly, when evaluating, think about how you're going to test it and how you're going to develop your app going forward in those 6 months. And have a look at the way Redwood allows you to test every little piece, from even at, from the cell and the web component side to your services, to your GraphQL, and things like that always seem like an afterthought, but they can't be afterthoughts if you're going to be a business, or you're going to be a startup, or you're going to have multiple developers coming in, or you're open source and there's a lot of collaboration. The amount of the capability of Redwood to test and that you can deploy with confidence is so high. So sometimes you have to think of the things that aren't as glamorous, so to speak, as server-side rendering and caching. It's the kind of the ugly stuff, the logging, the caching, the testing, the storybook, the things that don't get a lot of attention. But if you're going to be a product, you really need as you go into the enterprise.
And one more thing I'd encourage, I just showed this in the chat here, and this is for everyone. This is a great question, so thank you for letting us take some time with it. But check out what is happening with your rendering and how the rendering is architected on a page with all three of those frameworks. So with Next, you have data fetching at the route level. With Remix, I don't know that much, but like they're using React Router. And so they're going to be a little bit more like what Redwood has with cells, which makes so Toby, who's on the core team, and we'll get a future demo from him. He was one of the other people that would love to have present during this. He does a demo here where he shows, I'll just start this.
I have been having some.
Sorry, let me silence that. But you'll see how Redwood Cells is loading data by component. And then you have state, and he goes through this whole this is Tapes, this is a product built on Redwood, and he's showing a Redwood app in it, which I kind of love the meta story there. But Toby goes through in this screencast how he went from a slower loading state for all of those components, a dynamic menu, and so a product landing page, right? And how he optimized, he statically rendered all of this in a build step so that the page loads instantaneously, and then all of those dynamic parts reload once the page loads. And he could show you that. And that's just because Redwood uses an islands of interactivity architecture with cells in a component, and it fetches data in a very specific way. So this is a really important part about performance down the road. There will be a lot more coming out for Redwood, having built in pre-rendering, full static builds, dynamic static page builds, but all that's down the road. We can't really say when, unfortunately, but yeah, lots to come. Jump into the community, and we'd love to help answer some questions from there. But these are just questions everyone has, so that's why I wanted to take some time to show those now. Maybe we have one more question. Yeah, we had one more question from Anonymous, if this individual is still here. But when should one use Redwood.js? When they want to build a full stack app, or can it be used as a front end only or back end only? Redwood seems like a great choice for both. Anyone want to take a stab at that?
Yes. The answer is yes. Well, the beauty of decoupling of your front end and your back end is that you get to say yes to that. There's none of the other competing frameworks could possibly say yes to that. And so, and that's because of GraphQL, because to me, if you want to scale your application and you want to scale your organization, being able to decouple your front end and your back end is an amazing way to do that. And it makes both of those sides a lot simpler to understand. And you can have teams of people that focus on the front end and teams of people that focus on the back end, and they know how to communicate via GraphQL. And it's a beautiful story from all the way from the front end design too. If you have mock-ups of what you want your website to look like, you can mock out the data fetching for that very easily in Storybook and say, well, I know what kind of data I want to get back. So as you're working on your front end and your front end developers are building out the React components, they don't actually need a back end there in order to do that. This is one of the greatest things that React offers, is the ability to just take props in and render out, minus having to deal with context a little bit. But that's where mocking comes in, or the data fetching, right? Data fetching makes that really hard, where you're like, oh, well, my cell fetches data and then renders. Like, how do I make that work in Storybook without actual data fetching behind it? And Redwood's answer is, well, we provide mocks for that. And so, and that's because of GraphQL. You just say, well, what's the GraphQL data that would come back from that cell fetch? And it's just JSON. It's just a GraphQL statement. It makes it really easy to mock that stuff out in a very consistent and understandable way. And so that's what the decoupling gives you. And of course, you could throw away the front end and only implement the back end. It's just a GraphQL API, totally 100% fine. If you want a GraphQL API, Redwood is, as far as I have been able to discover right now, would be the best way to do that. We offer so many tools for doing that. If you only want to use the front end and you want to re-implement your GraphQL backend in Rust or something because you need super mega performance, like, it's GraphQL. You could do that. You could start with Redwood's backend in GraphQL and say, that's great, but at some point in the future, you need to strap it to some other GraphQL implementation. Like, you could totally do that. Or you want to stitch together a couple of schemas and put that in between so that you have access to this combined schema that crosses several different SaaS applications. Guess what? It's GraphQL. GraphQL is great at doing that kind of thing. So it gives you a huge amount of flexibility in how you connect the front end and the back end. And to me, the biggest one is long-term maintainability, the ability to grow your company. Like, these are all the problems that I have run into from building startups in the past. Where things get complicated is where you have tight coupling. And when you can decouple things, your life gets so much easier.
That there was a good answer. All right, everyone. We've crushed the overtime. So thank you. We'll work on tidying up some of our notes and getting the post up, but this was great. Really excited for what's to come. Happy holidays to everyone. It is a season, and really looking forward to what's to come in 2022 for this project. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Have a good afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world, and we will see you next time.
Thanks all. Yeah.
See you later.
Catch you next time. Rob, you crushed it.
Thanks.